Welcome everybody to our webinar of From Conversations to Conversions, AI strategies for accelerating revenue growth. For those of you who are new to this webinar, this is our thought leadership series where we're really just sharing valuable insights, trying to foster a sense of contact center community where we're exchanging ideas and learning from one another. So you'll notice in this series or webinar rather that there's a lot of interaction. We want to hear from you and we want to have you as a part of the discussion. I'm Jackie, the Director of Product Marketing here at Observe. I have a heavy focus on pre-sales value. So what that means is I work really closely with our customer success team and data value team to understand what are our customers seeing from the platform and bringing that to our prospects to help them really see what's tangible through the Observe.AI platform. And as always, we have my partner in crime, my co-host, Sneha. And today we're lucky enough to have our resident expert on all things revenue, Shaq. So Sneha, why don't you kick it off with an intro and then we'll pass it to Shaq.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Hey everyone, I'm Sneha. I lead the Business Value and Analytics department here at Observe. My team is responsible for driving customer value. So what this means is we engage with customers through different touch points in the entire customer lifecycle. So it starts all the way in the pre-sales prospecting stage up until customer success, where we're deriving insights, analytics to drive ROI. I am really excited to co-host the session with Jackie, but even more excited to have Shaq as our guest speaker today. And just before I hand it over to Shaq, I do want to let the audience know that the three of us in today's conversation, we're going to be referencing our insights, some best practices, not just from our experience at Observe, but also from a lot of learnings that we've had by talking to industry leaders in the contact center space. Over to you, Shaq.
Awesome. Thanks, Sneha. Yeah, super excited to be here. Hey, everyone. My name is Farhan Shakeel, go by Shaq, Principal Customer Success Manager here at Observe. So I run our strategic customer success team at Observe. It's really focused on driving our white glove partnerships and strategic initiatives with some really fantastic customers. And a little bit about myself. I've been going in about 4 years now at Observe, which is pretty crazy. And been in the contact center AI space for about 10 years, and actually started off as a chat and call center agent. So kind of grown up in this space, which has been really cool to see. And it's a space near and dear to my heart. So really excited to work with everyone today and to talk a little bit more about how revenue can really help in terms of generating more profit for the contact center. I guess I'll just start really quick with addressing, why revenue loss in contact centers is a critical issue. I think, it's going to be one of the key themes that we talk about today. And every business is striving for financial growth, right? But in today's market, achieving it is more challenging than ever. Competition is a little bit more stricter. Customers are getting bombarded with a lot of complex inquiries and messages across every channel. And that really means that personalization experiences are going to be more in demand. And more than that, we're seeing that customer churn is going to accelerate a little bit. So contact center is going to play a huge role in driving that retention and long-term value. So I'm excited to be here today again to start the conversation. There's a lot to unpack, but I think with every great thing, you kind of have to start with building the foundation and starting to understand how you can really leverage AI on top of that. So very excited to be here today.
Wonderful. We're so happy you joined us. All right, so let's kick things off with a little bit of housekeeping items on the next slide. So first, if you have questions or want to interact with us, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, you not only have a chat window, but also a Q&A section. We will have Q&A at the end, so feel free to just drop those questions in throughout the session as they come up, and we will be sure to get through as many as possible. Your mics will be off, so please use that chat function as much as possible to interact with us. Of course, the session will be recorded, and we will send it out after the webinar. Okay, well, let's kick things off with a fun icebreaker. So you'll see on the slide, if your contact center had unlimited budget for one tech upgrade, what would you choose? So drop your answer in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, and let's see what you guys come up with. One thing, one upgrade.
Yeah. And while we wait for that, I think this is like a very interesting question, right? When I think about like the best thing to invest in, I really start to go around quality and auto QA, right? Really because quality is such a barometer across the business that everyone uses, and I don't think we fully understand how much we talk about it, right? Either in conversations when we're like, hey, is this meeting really needed, right? What's the quality of this meeting we're going to have? What's the quality of a product that we're delivering? What's the quality of service we're offering in our conversations? It's such an important aspect of the business, and I think we're always thinking about it, but really leveraging the aggregation of that data to make informed decisions becomes a huge benefit and a huge superpower for a lot of businesses. So, you know, when we say auto QA, you think of quality assurance, but I really just think about automating more insights for the quality process in general, right? Just how can you really leverage quality to generate more insights, more revenue, right? Because you want to generate revenue, but you also want to make sure you're not sacrificing quality at the same time, right? And you're pushing that. So that's just something that I think about when I think about unlimited budget. That's like such a fun thing to think about too. It's just there's so many things you can do, but I always go back to automating quality.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. Shaq probably has heard this multiple times. Be it internal or external stakeholders, this is something I always emphasize, that your data is only as good as the action you take upon it, right? And so when you are auditing or evaluating such a small sample of calls, you risk revenue loss because your margin of error is going to be a lot higher. Your confidence levels are going to be a lot lower. But when you have visibility across 100% of your conversations, that's your foundational pillar for any future success coaching.
Yeah, I love that. And let's just look at the chat responses here. I promise, Sean Hines, if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, I promise we didn't plant him to say Observe.AI, but I appreciate that. I think one thing I'll say, in terms of what everyone's saying in the chat, it's all valid. And I wouldn't be in product marketing if I didn't talk about just getting the most out of your value for the least amount, right? And what does that mean? Auto QA, yes, makes sense. True conversational AI, yes. Business analytics, yes. So if you do really have unlimited budget for one tech upgrade, think about how you can get all of that into one platform so that you can not only understand it all, but then pivot as your business, needs change and initiatives change, so that you can always be adaptive and flexible.
Yeah, and I see some more in the chat. I see AI for customer support needs. I see conversation analytics, predictive analytics. Absolutely, yeah. I think these are use cases that we see across our customer base, and it is difficult to choose one thing that you would want to go for, right? So all options. There's no right answer to this. All options are right, and every need is genuine. Having said that, I do want to start being mindful of everyone's time. I do want to start on our first segment, which is revenue loss. So in the last webinar, I did briefly touch upon this, but I'm going to touch upon this again in this session, and that's how contact centers are very frequently viewed as cost centers, and how important it is to change that narrative of contact centers being revenue generators or revenue accelerators. Now, we're usually looking at a budget which is spent on additional headcount from an operational standpoint. And that's seen as an operational expense for a lot of big organizations. And what we need to start doing is Start seeing it as how your agents, your experts who are trained in the contact center are working towards impacting your revenue goals, whether they're directly or indirectly associated with it. Now, let's take a simple example. Maybe you're having an issue with your internet service provider and you are on a conversation, you're on a call with a customer support team, and the representative on the other hand does a fantastic job at resolving your issue, not just in a short span of time, but also in one call. So what's going to happen in this conversation? You're going to walk out of this call feeling extremely satisfied, right? One of two things can happen once you move out of this conversation. One, because you're so satisfied with the service, you might choose to stay with this provider for a longer period of time, increasing the customer lifetime value. Two, because you're so happy, and if you know a few of your friends are on the lookout or hunt for another internet service provider, you may recommend this provider to them. So you see what happens here? These agents, through fantastic, unparalleled customer experience, they're not just influencing retention, but also influencing net new sales. So before we dive a little deeper, I do want to do a quick poll. So let's get into the poll here. Which of these is your number one reason for lost revenue in contact centers?
Yeah, and I do just want to call out the polls here are directly on the slide. So if you just go on to the slide, you can click your answer specifically. While we're waiting for some responses, I feel like this poll is so telling in such a great way to begin our discussion today. And somebody in the chat said it so perfectly. Contact centers should be viewed as strategic assets in realizing business goals and objectives. 100%. As Sneha mentioned, every agent in your contact center, whether they're in sales or service, has an impact on revenue. So while their day-to-day responsibilities may differ, all roads lead back to business growth, which is why the contact center should be seen as the strategic asset. So if I'm being bullish, I'm going to say there's one key takeaway for today, and it's this. Revenue isn't just a sales focus. It is a contact center-wide initiative. Let's talk about why. Every challenge in this poll is directly tied to revenue loss. Long hold times, we may think of that as more of an operational KPI. But in fact, to Sneha's example, it could lead to abandoned calls. It could lead to a lower conversion rate and ultimately a frustrated customer who could churn. Poorly trained agents could lead to missed sales opportunities, poor resolution rates, and lower CSAT, which ultimately affects not only retention, but also referrals. Lack of customer follow-ups, this could help you or not help you. It could lead to a loss of upsell or cross-sell opportunities and decrease the lifetime value of a customer. And last but definitely not least, and I know you feel passionately about this one, Sneha, no personalization in interactions. Less engagement leads to weaker brand loyalty, fewer repeat purchases, definitely reduces your word of mouth marketing. So lots to kind of consider here. And I think, depending on what your role is in the contact center, I think it's, revenue should be top of mind for you. And we want to have the discussion today of how we can help you kind of think through that and help you become that strategic asset. So Shaq, based on your experience, how are businesses tackling these challenges to minimize their revenue loss?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, each one of these presents its own unique challenges. And I think every business kind of is thinking about these a little differently, right? For example, long hold times. There are some businesses that might be in the mindset of, hey, what we just need to find out what the right hold time is. Is it 2 minutes? Is it 3 minutes, right? And then others are like, hey, we just can't have hold times, right? We need to be really effective with the way that our knowledge is being transferred to our customers, and we don't want to put people on hold. But it directly impacts all those KPIs, and I think that's one thing that folks that are looking at, are we providing the right experience? Are we doing the right things? They're not always thinking about how does it tie back to that outcome, right? Is it actually a revenue loss if we're doing X, Y, and Z behavior? Is it and I think that's one of the beautiful things about conversational intelligence, but also the way that AI is expanding is you can start to tie a lot of this stuff to outcomes, right? So you're not really getting impacted by that. But for long hold times, it's varying across the industry. But I think more and more we're seeing, okay, how can we just put the knowledge in front of the agents? How can we properly get them ready so when they hit the floor, they feel confident. And when they're confident, that provides a better experience. And that also flows into the whole poorly trained agents thing, right? Like there's a lot of businesses that will deal with attrition and bandwidth issues, and they got to get a team out on the floor ASAP, right? So when they're dealing with that, they might not have the time to, poorly trained can make it seem also like it was something that happened with the training material or the trainer. That's not always the case, right? It might just be that they had to get a team on the floor to take calls right away. And when you're putting agents in that position, they're not very confident, right, in terms of what they can provide. So at that point, it's like, okay, let's accept the reality of where we're at, and how can we empower them when they're in that conversation or having those really maybe their first call is something really tough, right? How can you give them the right resources to feel confident and actually still provide a really good experience? Otherwise, you tend to get into a more defensive mode where you're just like, I just need to solve this issue and I just need to find the answer. I'm not even thinking about like giving them a really great experience or doing some of the follow-ups, which is the other one here. And how am I going to upsell and cross-sell? If I'm just thinking about getting them the answer, I'm not even thinking about what other products and offerings we have. And I think the more resources that they have, the more knowledge they have, the more confident they'll be. And upsell is such a it's such a unique thing where I think there's a tendency for businesses to think that it's only a skill, but a lot of it is just doing it, right? Like just offering it. And I think sometimes it can be like, okay, is it too pushy, right? Is it something where we're upselling in the right way for the right product? And again, this is where data-driven decisions are a big piece. Like if you want to do upsells, what are those common products that are being bought together today, right? Or looking at it and saying, what products do we need to talk about more? And let's just start talking about them and seeing what the reaction is. In a way, when your contact center is kind of like this ultimate like testing playground where you have different types of conversations and you can see how, without sacrificing the experience, without doing that, how can we actually bring new things into the fold and see how our customers react to that, right? And I think that goes into personalization, which Sneha, I know you have a lot of thoughts on, but it's super key, right? You have to be able to personalize your conversations.
Yeah, I feel pretty passionately about personalization and interactions, and I see that's also the highest voted poll. So I'm glad people, feel that way too. So I think personalization, it is your distinguishing factor for your brand when it comes to, being different from your competitors. Now, if you have agents repeating the same script over and over, you're going to risk them sounding very robotic. And what that's going to do is it's not going to help you build that personal relationship, that rapport with the customer, and uncover, other intentions that could open up doors for other cross-sell, upsell opportunities, right? On the other hand, if I'm talking to someone who is putting in that effort to showcase empathy, understanding my needs, then I, as a customer, I feel very valued, and I am more engaged in having that conversation with that agent. A lot of times when we're talking about revenue or when we're talking about sales in general, I think the way we look at it is, either some agent is trying to sell someone something or they're trying to prevent someone from, canceling a purchase that they've made with that company. A huge piece, the in-between piece here, is service-based sales, right? So there are a lot of organizations where the agents are required to first resolve the query the customer calls in about. Post-resolution, they have the opportunity to attempt to make an upsell or cross-sell offer. And when you're not personalizing a conversation with the customer in such use cases, if you're not doing enough probing, not asking the right discovery questions, not trying to truly understand if this customer could be a future prospect, if you're not doing the lead qualification right, then you're going to lose revenue there. And the biggest revenue gap that I've seen in these use cases is the attempt to make an offer. If you do not make an offer, if you don't try to upsell, then you're not going to know which direction the outcome's going to land in, right? So a lot of times, agents, representatives, they almost think that the customers would feel frustrated if they go in and try to make an upsell right after solving a problem. But a lot of times, like, it is part of their requirement. You need to make that upsell attempt. You need to make that cross-sell attempt. And what's in your control is make the offer, like understand the customer's intention, do your lead qualification, personalize the interaction, make the offer. 50% of the times may go in your favor, 50% of the times may not go in your favor. What you can't control is the final intent of the customer wanting to purchase or not. But what you can control is the personalization piece. So that's why I feel pretty passionate about this. I think personalization is so key to just driving a longer customer lifetime value.
Yeah, and I just want to add really quick to that. Like, I love the idea of just like, you have to try it, right? And I think when it comes to personalization, you know, we always jump to the end state of like, how can every person uniquely personalize every conversation, right? But you'll be surprised that with just starting with things like, you know, building some rapport in the middle, or just saying things like good afternoon, good evening, you know, using their name, like just these small things are building blocks, right? If you're building the same way as building a muscle, like you gotta start with some reps in different ways and then build up from there. But you'll be surprised at the experience that, you know, how much it just shifts from doing simple things like that, from a personalization aspect, and then building on top of that to see what works, what doesn't work. But when you're always looking at that end state, you very rarely think, oh, okay, yeah, there's things I can start to do to personalize. Or even, can I put information in front of my my agents and my frontline team, so that when they hear from a customer, they already know who's calling in a way, right? They know what are they facing. Like, some of the best experiences I have calling in are when you know, maybe I need to change my flight or something, and they're like, oh yeah, we see it's already been delayed 3 or 4 times, right? And it's like, okay, like, you understand where my frustration is at this point. That's a different level of personalization, right? And I think a lot of that sometimes gets lost because there's this euphoric end state that everyone wants to create, but you got to start with some data to get that going. So,
yeah, I love that. And just to close it out, I think it like helps disarm you as a consumer, right? When you're calling a contact center, it's because you have a problem. So that frustration level is so high. So if they come in and they're like, hi, Jackie, I know your flight's been delayed 3 times. That's not great. It's all of a sudden I'm like, oh, they totally understand me, versus me just wanting to come in all hot and heavy and ready to, you know, scream out my frustrations. I think it just lets me take a deep breath and, you know, have a great conversation. So I think, you know, all great points here, and personalization is definitely a big one. Okay, we do have a chat or a question in the chat, which is a great one. Why don't we take this one and then we'll move to the next section. Is there a metric to track how much personalization there is? And it can also affect average handle time. So keeping that in mind, that's a great point. But Sneha or Shaq, what would be a good KPI there?
Yeah, I can start, Sneha, if you have anything to add. I think this is like a leading indicator into a KPI that exists today, which is customer satisfaction, right, or NPS. I think personalization, when you're looking at experience overall, that's really what you want to achieve. But it's more of a correlating factor to all those things. It can also correlate to it can heavily correlate actually to sales conversion, because if you have the right type of report. But it's a great point also. It can impact average handle time. So we do have a lot of customers that look at and say, what's the right amount of personalization, right? Where do we want to do it? Then there's some where you might have conversations that are super long, and actually it's okay, right? Because maybe the amount of the conversion you're going to get is, you know, from a ratio perspective, is actually worth it, right? So I think just being data driven in that way, but it's not so much that it's the metric personalization, it's a correlating, if you were to, like, you know, draw a bunch of lines off of it, it correlates to probably 3 or 4 really key contact center metrics. But Sneha, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I just want to add one point here. So I know, Shaq, you talked about customer satisfaction, and then in terms of how much personalization is the right personalization, I think outside of your endpoint survey from the customer, another way to track this is looking at a turn level sentiment, right? So, or looking at the shift in sentiment from the beginning of the conversation to the end of the conversation. So you have the ability to track how many times an agent is trying to personalize on a call. And then based on that, at each attempt of personalization, can you see a shift in the sentiment? So maybe someone's tried to personalize 3 or 4 times. At this point in time, it's getting too aggressive. And so you might see the sentiment be a little negative. Maybe someone's just done it 2 times, and then that's worked out really well for most of the customers. So you do have the ability to map your turn level sentiment to the number of times personalization attempt happened in a call to then understand based on your data, like what would be the right amount of personalization.
Love that. Great question. Thanks for asking that. Okay, to keep us on track here, let's shift gears to the next topic, which is AI's biggest revenue impact. In last month's webinar, we actually ran a poll to understand AI's impact, and a big chunk of our audience actually said they're using AI but have yet to see meaningful results. And I know everybody here, Shaq, Sneha, myself, we feel so passionately about this topic and how to see the impact and the ways to get you there. But let's launch our second poll and just understand a little bit about how you guys think about AI. If AI could instantly improve one aspect of your revenue strategy, what would it be? And again, for this poll, you just click directly on the screen and your answer will be submitted. And while we're waiting, let's dig into this a little bit because I do feel so passionately about this. A lot of companies are investing in AI and they just aren't seeing the impact. And that's definitely a problem because AI has so much power behind it to drive the most amazing, real, measurable outcomes. And I think one of the biggest gaps I hear in my conversations with prospects is just the narrow focus of how they think about AI. It's often treated as a tool for one function. And Sneha, you and I talk about this a lot, right? Like tools before AI were for CS or for marketing or product marketing. But now with AI, it's for everybody. If one person purchases AI, everybody can reap the benefits because of the data and the insights that it's getting its hands on. So it's not just a department specific tool anymore. It can be a business-wide advantage. So when I'm talking to the prospects about this, I ask a lot, what's your biggest pain point? But also, what are your leaders focused on? What are their big picture revenue initiatives? Because the reality is, to somebody's point in the chat, contact center leaders can and should influence those conversations. So I'd love to pick your brain on this a little bit, Shaq, and just understand what's the difference that you see in conversations with customers on AI as a siloed use case versus AI seen as more of a company-wide initiative and how they're thinking about it in terms of accelerating their revenue growth.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think when it comes to a company-wide initiative, there's just a lot more structure in terms of the end-to-end process, right? And for example, if you're looking at something, and a lot of customers will look at this, like, why do our customers leave us, right? Why can't we provide more customer lifetime value? And you want to understand that so then you can utilize AI to maybe, I think we saw in the chat earlier, right? Do some predictive analytics and some forecasting and maybe stop that trend from happening. But when you're going through that piece and you're trying to really understand what customers are doing, if you don't have a good structure of what their journey was, right, or really understanding as a whole company what happened, where the breakdown actually was, I can use the analogy of, like, if I wanted to report a pothole outside my house, I need the intersection, right? I need to tell them where the intersection is so they know where to go and find it. But if I don't have that data, if I don't know what streets I live on, like, it's going to be really hard for me to do that, right? So I think as a company-wide initiative, there's a lot more focus. There's a lot more it's kind of a customer journey across the entire org. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit too, but I think there's just really a lot of importance on the connectivity of it, right? Whereas if it's siloed, you actually will have some really great data being presented, but it's never holistic, right? You might see that, hey, actually we found that, look at all these negative surveys, right? And actually that's why these customers are turning, but that might be 5% of 5% take rate on those surveys, and it's a really low number of customers, and those are the ones that want to raise their hand, right, and talk about an issue that they had. And when you're basing it off of that, and you're kind of trying to go back into the business, you lose the buy-in. And let's be honest, that happens all the time, where you're trying to take data back, and another business unit sees things differently because they're not connected in the journey the same way that group was. And it's no fault to either of the sides of the business, but if there's no singular journey painted or understood, then it's going to be really tough for businesses to use AI to pinpoint those things, right? Because then it's just like, hey, go and fix everything. But yeah, if you want to go fix a pothole, and I'm telling you exactly how to fix it, what the best way is, and then so it doesn't erode in a certain amount of time, I can give it all that information. But if I don't know where it is, it's kind of useless in that way, right? So I think that's where the company-wide pieces make such a difference, versus where if it's siloed, you're going to have really great data in different places, but it's not going to be connected to the actual journey that's happening, which I think is super, super important.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, it kind of goes back to the traditional saying of the contact center is sitting on this treasure trove of data, right? And so what are you going to do with that data? Instead of staying within, the traditional lane of let me QA, let me coach my agents, it's how do I, now that I'm actually going from 2% to 100% of data, right, and analyzing those conversations, how do I now share this wealth and really use it as an accelerant to everything? So I think it's kind of like helping customers and prospects think about how do I, take a few steps forward versus staying in the way that I used to do things, right? And just really putting value behind what you're doing, because it really is the toughest job, but also the most rewarding when you think about the insights that you're getting from all of these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on the flip side, I know I really talked about like when it doesn't work. I think when it does work, it's a beautiful thing, right? First of all, it's a beautiful thing, but more importantly, it's very thoughtful and data driven, right? So it's, we have customers that are really looking at, okay, what's actually happening in these calls where we're not converting, right? How do we convert more? What are the behaviors that are driving conversion? And then, they understand the journey. They understand where the customer is at, right? Like whether it's, scheduling an appointment, whether it's, upselling a product. It's, okay, where's the customer at in their journey when they have this conversation with us, right? Because that's super key to driving the revenue and then driving the next action well, right? So if it's scheduling, how do you make sure they schedule and they show, right? And when they show, they actually get the product that they want, or that they get the service that they want. And then, you use that stuff in real time, and then you're feeding it to others in the organization in terms of what worked well, what didn't, and how you can drive more of those behaviors. Then all of a sudden marketing is getting involved, right? And they're trying to say, hey, you know what, these are the things that really work. And when they go in to show up for these things, they're looking for really high quality service, but they also want to get in and out quickly. So how can we, best do that and market to that we have really great service and quick service, or whatever it is. So like everyone gets involved, and I think, you have to have that map laid out. And when you do, it's kind of like everybody's singing from the same sheet of music.
Right, let's take a look at some of these poll responses. Okay, so it's interesting that no one's mentioned automating follow-ups to close more deals. I would have thought that would definitely be one of our top two responses, but identifying best sales opportunities, yes, that is spot on. I think that is going to be a direct indicator of growing your revenue. And so completely aligned with that, providing live objection handling. And I think this is super important too, right? In real time. A lot of the times what's happening in today's world is, hey, you're waiting for these conversations to get processed. And then, after a week or two, you're looking at the historical data, then coming up with coaching opportunities, training the agents and telling them, hey, in your conversations moving forward, do X, Y, Z. But what if you were to flip that and tell your agents that, hey, in the conversation, while you're handling it in real time, if the customer poses an objection, this is how you handle it, right? So you don't have to wait for 2 to 3 weeks after to do that success coaching. It just happens on the call, almost like a self-coaching mechanism. So that's an interesting one. And then predicting customer churn. I know, Shaq, you touched upon this too. So really interesting responses. We're ready to move on to the final segment.
I want to add one more thing to the objections. I think, objection handling itself is very powerful when used the right way. And I think things like dynamically answering, when an objection comes up, dynamic prompting, being ready to handle those certain objections is a super, we talked about, having an agent hit the floor maybe before they're not ready, like, empowering them with that kind of technology in their hands where, hey, dynamically, if somebody says X, you should maybe say Y, I think is really, really impactful for them. And also helps build the confidence, but it gives the customer calling in a lot of confidence too, in terms of the knowledge of the agent, and then also how to handle those objections. And when you're able to handle objections effectively, quickly, you can really move forward quickly, right? Again, going back to not having to fixate on resolving the issue only as your outcome, right? If that's the only outcome you're thinking about, then that's probably the only outcome you're going to get, right? But if the outcome you're thinking about is, hey, I handled the objection, I can move through on the sales conversation and really look at how can I close this, or how I can make sure that the customer has the best experience possible to build rapport in that experience, then you're driving towards that. So I think the more that AI really understands in post-call, right, like what's going on in these conversations to feed into those real-time experiences, again, that's going to help you connect, right, the journey a little bit more and understand those different parts of your journey, so it doesn't feel siloed, and really going to boost the learnings internally.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jack. All right. If we don't have any questions from the audience in the chat, let's move on to our final segment, and that is confidence in data connectivity in your contact centers. So I know, Jackie, you mentioned that contact centers, they're a treasure trove, gold mine of data. And then Shaq, you talked about how a lot of times these data sources, they're so siloed. So anytime you're trying to take an action, like you don't have the holistic picture of where to take that action on. And even at the start of the session, I briefly touched upon data being as good as the action you take upon it. But now that I think about it, that's a secondary step. In order for your data to actually be your true source of truth, like there needs to be a seamless integration and data connectivity in place, right? And it is essential because it helps you get access to real-time customer information. It helps you with, performance trend monitoring. It helps you personalize those interactions. And if you don't have that seamless data connectivity, then you're not going to be able to take the right action on it. Now, a simple example, right? So we know a lot of customers, they have data stored in different CRMs, different databases, and it's not necessary for all of this data to flow into one platform that acts as your one-stop solution. Now, a simple example would be, hey, you care about conversion insights, right? And we have customers asking us, hey, tell me what are my top performers doing differently? What strategies are working out for them that I can then roll out across the rest of the board to make sure that I'm generating more revenue? Fantastic. I have the conversational information. I'm going to try to look for those attributes. But if I don't have the final outcome of the call, which is the sales metadata, right? Whether the sale happened in the conversation, whether it did not happen, whether it was dispositioned as, a future prospect. If I don't have that information, as much as I can proxy whether a sale happened on that call or not, it's the accuracy of the data is not going to be that good. It's not going to be better than us getting the true metadata from whatever CRM it's stored in into our platform. right? That's just one example. Another way around the holistic view is a lot of customers, they have coaching happening on a different platform. They are queuing on a different platform, and then the conversations are getting processed on a different platform. And so when you have so many different platforms, and on the back end, you're trying to struggle to gather data points from coaching, from QA, from your conversation, map it all together, and then understand, oh, this is what's truly happening in my data, right? So data connectivity is so important in making sure that we're able to drive that impact, that revenue. Before we dive deeper into this, and I know, Shaq, you feel pretty passionately about this topic in particular, we're going to do one last poll, right? So the poll's going to be up on the screen. Do you feel confident in your data connectivity journey from the beginning of the sales process to the end? So it's going to be a 1 to 10 scale. And Shaq, while the audience is answering this poll, let's discuss the spectrum here a little bit. So why don't you share your perspective on, provide an example of a contact center at a 1 and a contact center at a 10-point scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, even before I start giving the example, I think one of the really unique things that you described there, Sneha, is the shift that we've seen over the last few years around what speech analytics used to be versus conversational intelligence, right? Like speech analytics really was, okay, let's analyze the call conversation and let's get analytics around how much things are being said, all of that. Like what conversation intelligence is really doing is it's providing the intelligence back to your business and how conversations connect to all of the different parts of your journey, right? So I think that's super unique in the way that we've seen the industry shift. And I think more and more customers want to understand that. And when they come to us, or even when they're just working through their own internal like OKRs, they're really thinking about how can we better inform the business on what's being said and how these things are being presented and what outcomes they're driving. But yeah, I mean, I think a contact center at a 1, right? They're doing maybe just speech analytics still, right? They're looking at things like how often is this being said, or they might not even have speech analytics or a quality, kind of program, right? That they're thinking about. They just have the call data, and when they're looking at that, they might have a 1 or 2% quality audit percentage. So they're only auditing a very small percentage of their calls. They're also doing coaching in different systems. Maybe they're doing ad hoc things where it's like, oh, if something blows up, let's actually just go and talk to that person. But we're not documenting any of it. We just want to make sure that it happened. And then also on top of that, it's all disconnected, right? So it's looked at as just, okay, this is a cost. This is something that we need to do to service our customers, but it's not actually looked at as something that's an experience curator or an information hub for the business that's generating revenue. And then a center at a 10, kind of like I was talking about earlier with the connectivity, it's kind of like a symphony of everything working, right? It's the agents are very empowered, they are enabled, and they have all the different tools that they need to provide really accurate and good information. And there's constant, analysis going on, whether it's through AI and automation or through even the augmented people that are looking at the data to say, hey, yeah, what we're doing is really effective versus maybe what we're doing is not effective. And that goes across all KPIs, right? And that's a constant learning that's happening, and everyone's tapping in, right? Again, I mentioned marketing. One of the other business units that I didn't mention that's probably the most critical when it comes to contact center switching from a cost center to a profit center is operations, right? How does the workflow go through, and how does operations actually connect the dots between what's happening in the customer journey and what's happening when the customer calls in, right? So when operations is super involved, you have a really clear picture of what's happening end to end, and then you can inform, when marketing does roll out some new messaging, what's being said, and what worked and what didn't work, and then you can probably use operations to push new messaging to the agents at the moment of truth to say, hey, actually, let's say it a little bit differently because we've learned this from the feedback we've gotten. And if something goes wrong, you have alerts going out to your supervisors to go in and coach those agents right away and say, hey, you know what, this is something you shouldn't be doing. Or actually it's happening across enough, so let's push it to a real-time experience, or let's push it upstream to something like a voice AI where it's actually capturing it before it even happens to contain those calls, so we can keep the calls per hour at a good rate and keep our, our people happy and not burn them out, right? So it's like, it's all connected in that way. And, when they're at a 10, they're operating at a really high efficiency. But they're using true, I go back to this, right? They're using true conversational intelligence related to outcomes versus just trying to understand, how often a word is being said and like maybe how does it affect one or two things, right? So.
Yeah, and I think this outcomes piece is so critical. And it's something that I talk about a lot with the contact center leaders that come into our funnel. It's really around, starting with the conversation intelligence and the insights, to your point, Shaq, versus starting with auto QA. Like that will feed into everything, of course, and that's how you get all of it. But let's open up that dashboard and think about it in terms of, let's analyze our interactions and what contacts can be avoided through feeding it to marketing and saying, this campaign's working, this website is actually bringing a lot of confusion. Let's increase that. Or optimize it, or here's some product complaints to the product team that let's go fix those issues to, keep those contacts down that can be preventable. But then how do we bring it back into the operations, right? How do we then handle the contacts that should be there? Do we automate it, or do we assist the agent through objection handling, those sorts of things? I think it's this, to your point, like this symphony of this beautiful flow of, this is a terrible example, but almost like a Tetris, right? Like, which way are you going to put it? You have all this data, and now you just kind of got to move it in the right place and think about it in the right way. And so I think that's where, a 10 is just, to your point, this wonderful symphony. So I love that analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the ones that operate at the highest level, I think they tend to think about it from like a step-by-step, basis. And it's really about organizing your data in the right way. One of our customers, really seasoned leader, told me like, often we internally think about people, process, and technology, but we're not actually organizing our conversational data that way, right? But if we were, then it actually informs those different units, right? And if it's technology, let's say with your site, and there's certain pages on your site that really help resolution, and there's a bunch of calls coming in that could be handled by that part, right? Like that's informing, your business to go and make changes and maybe put that information on the site so that it can help them, get that resolution from a self-service capability. So it's really unique in the way when you're thinking about it truly from organizing your data in the same way that your business works and organizes their own internal processes, it starts to really flow naturally, right? Whereas if you're treating the contact center as a separate entity from your business, it's going to feel that way too, right? When it comes to the data you're getting, you're going to be like, this is kind of foreign to me. This doesn't relate to what I do on a day-to-day. But if it's like in those same buckets that you operate in, you start to consume it really easily. And then that helps you push things more in terms of, generating revenue from different parts of the business as well, because all of them touch it in certain ways. It's just, only certain folks are probably actually driving it or responsible for it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're having some technical difficulties pushing the results onto the slide here. So I'm just asking for our wizard here to pass me the results real time. But I think that was extremely helpful and really good to kind of hear the scale of like 1 to 10. I'm definitely curious. It sounds like about 14% were at 1, 14% said that they were at 3 in terms of data connectivity. Almost 30% said that they were at 4, 14% said they were at 6, and about 30% said they were at 7. So a pretty good range. And for those, 5 and above, that's extremely impressive.
It's really good. That's really good. If you're 5 and above, that means you either have enough to kind of get started, right, in terms of understanding, and you're going towards that path of really fully getting proactive. That's the goal that everyone wants to do when it comes to revenue, is how can we be more proactive versus reactive and learning afterwards, right? So if you're above that scale, I think you get to a really good point. So that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, based on time, I would love to get to some of the questions. So let's open it up to some Q&A. And I have a few that I can read out to you guys and whoever wants to jump in and respond. So the first one, any suggestions on how to introduce these things to agents so that they don't feel micromanaged or threatened?
Yeah, I can talk about this a little bit. So, from our customers, this is always a really key talking point for change management, right? Is how does this look like, or how do we make sure that this is perceived in the right way, that it's enablement and it's not just, big brother type of thing going on. And I think it's just that, right? When it comes to messaging is, hey, what are the agent pain points? And I think the companies that do this really well have great adoption and great stories, right? I had a customer example where one agent was, given access, fully enabled, and they just started doing self-coaching, right? They started coaching themselves, listening to their calls, really understanding what worked well, what didn't, and they were super excited to bring that into their conversations with their manager, right? And be like, hey, look, I looked at these three. I thought I did it in these calls, but I didn't, and this is what I've learned. So it's bringing them into the fold, right? I think we tend to, when it comes to change management, it's like, here's the comms, that's it, right? But like an employee survey right before that happens, understanding what their pain points are, so that way when you're sending out the messaging and you're sending out the features, what things it is addressing for them. And it always goes down to like, what have you done for me lately, right? They have so many tools that they look at, they have so many things that they have to work within. That if you're showing something that's truly beneficial for them, you can help them, ease some of that anxiety and more feel empowered and confident that this is going to truly help them. So I think it really comes down to the change management aspect.
Yeah, and I'll just add one piece to that. It's change management and also how you message it. When you think about a lot of the customers that come in and our customer stories, it's, they were only analyzing, say, 4 calls a month for that agent, and then, strapped on time to prep for coaching. And then when we went to the coaching, maybe the agent was having a bad day, or it was a really difficult call. And so it's actually just kind of bringing that real case scenario to the conversation to the agents and say, I want to be better for you. I want to help you improve in the right ways. And so this, while it is recording all of your calls, is allowing me to understand a more fair representation and a more unbiased representation of what is happening, so that I can help you be the best and you see me more as a coach versus, maybe just constructive criticism more times than not. So I think that's another key piece that is interesting.
Yeah, and AI is at the forefront of everything, right? So the best part of my job is like seeing our customers grow, like they get promoted, they start to really lean into their career path when it comes to adopting this tech. So agents doing that, we've seen that as well, like going into QA positions, going into coaching positions. So I think that's also something that we don't always talk about when it first starts, but it's something that is really relevant to their growth and what they want to see. So
yeah, and not so much a question, but maybe just a really good point. And maybe, Shaq, you can just talk about it quickly for the other folks on the call. It came in the chat. Customer service as an org is less integrated with different functions like operations, training, learning and development. They're all working so much in silos right now. So how can you stitch them to work together? I think that's such a good point. And I think I just wanted to kind of flip it into a question in terms of when you're talking about this symphony, right? And when you're thinking about all those different functions, how do you tackle that conversation when you're talking about adoption, change management, and breaking down those silos?
Yeah, I think the best way, and I mean, this is a little bit of of what I've seen with our Observe.AI customers, is that when you empower them to bring data that matters to those orgs to those parts of the business, because they're all moving at a million miles an hour, right? They have tons of things to do. But when you're bringing that data to them in a way that is helpful and contributes to their workflows, this is where like really good contact center leaders or our, understand the business, because then they can take segments of the data and say, hey, actually, this is an operations process, operations issue. Let's bring it to operations. Or, hey, this is a technology issue. Let's bring it to our IT team, right? When you're bringing that conversational data into stuff that's relevant to them, they want to be involved, right? They want to get more of that data. They want to help and drive those outcomes. And again, goes back to, what have you done for me lately? Like they have a lot of stuff going on. And if you're able to show that and use conversational intelligence as kind of that connective tissue, it'll start to build. It'll start to build, and you'll see more and more folks come to the table. But if you can't show them things that are relevant to their workflows and what they're working on, it becomes really hard to try and break down those silos. But instead of breaking them down, it's more of entering and saying, hey, why don't you come over to my side too and hang out here for a little bit, and then those walls will slowly fall down.
Hang out with me over here. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is if you're maybe at a 1 versus a 5, think about it in steps. Sneha talks about this a lot in terms of pilot, right? Start small. If you really do have silos across all those functions, maybe think about the first function you want to start with and just start to establish that, turn them into a champion of how you have helped them lately and what that collaboration looked like, and use that as a part of your rollout plan. So just slowly kind of work your way through versus feeling really overwhelmed of how do I satisfy all of these key stakeholders in one fell swoop. One last question I want that I saw come through, and it's such a great one, we're almost at time, is can you provide the call data even if the hosted provider doesn't have an open API? Sneha, that might be a question for you.
Yeah, like accessing call data from a hosted provider that doesn't open up the API, I think that's a tricky one. So if there's no official way to access it, there could be like some alternatives that I could think of top of mind. One is providing downloadable logs or reports, right? So it could be CSVs, PDF format from the web interface. Of course, this is not an API, but if this is the data you need, that's one way for you to access it. The other thing is a custom integration. So a lot of time, to integrate, you can have like custom integration services when you are maybe through other means like, webhooks or other partner integrations. So this is definitely going to require you to work very closely with the provider support team. And then the third one that I can think of is sometimes just going the legal route, right? So if this data is really that important to you, then you may be able to reach out to the service provider support team. I think a lot of times they do have custom solutions for enterprises, but the challenge here is compliance. So I think a lot of times just getting access to this data, it's going to pose huge compliance threats. So just navigating that, I think that's going to be more of an internal conversation.
Perfect. I know a tricky question, but I think just such an important one to at least offer a little bit of guidance. So thanks, Sneha. All right, that wraps up today's session. A special thanks to Sneha for being my co-host, and of course to Shaq, thank you for being our guest of honor today. And of course, thank you to everybody on the phone. Thank you for being so interactive and really engaging in the polls and the questions and the Q&A. It would not be as fun if you weren't talking to us. And as a part of this series, we're also expanding the impact, not just to sharing insights to contact centers, but beyond. And so we're going to be donating on behalf of everyone on the call here today to a different charity every month. And this